the map application. And I'm like, yeah, just take the next exit at Vieux-Lyon. Well, if you're not familiar with how French is spelled, Vieux is spelled V-I-E-U-X, which that's what Clint is seeing. And he doesn't realize that that's what I'm saying. And so we pass the exit and I'm like, you just missed the exit.
This is Worldschooling Q&A. I'm Astrid, creator of The Wandering Daughter. As a traveling family, we've spent 4 years traveling full-time to over 18 countries and 6 continents. Wherever we go, we try to learn as much as we can about the countries and cultures we visit. While we didn't coin the term, we like to call this worldschooling, using the world as our classroom. Each week, my husband Clint and I will answer one question about worldschooling and share our experiences of traveling the world with our kids. Ready to get started? Great! Let's dive in.
This week, we're answering the question, how do I rent a car while traveling around the world?
Yeah, this is a great question. We often get asked, how do you get around when you travel? And we use all sorts of things. Public transportation. Sometimes we're in cities where we can just walk. But we love road tripping. We do that a lot here in the United States.
Yep.
So one of our family values is we like to road trip. So I think whenever we can, we do rent a car.
Yeah, that's a fun core travel memory for us. We've rented cars in Mexico, in Spain, in Italy, in the UK.
Yeah. And technically, I guess we've rented scooters too.
Yeah, in Indonesia. So that's also another aspect of rentals, vehicle rentals that we can cover too.
So what's the first document we usually need, or the first requirement, I guess, for renting a car?
The primary one is to have what's called an IDP, an International Driver's Permit. And this is basically a document that translates your current license into the language of the country. I mean, there's the main languages, French, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, things like that. Yeah.
And usually in English speaking countries, like say the UK, you don't need that. So for example, for countries that speak the same language as you originate from, you don't generally need an IDP, but it's inexpensive to get. It's really easy to get. You just go to your local AAA office, and we just recommend having it. It's good for up to a year. You can post date it for up to 6 months in advance. Mm-hmm. So just have it as part of your travel documentation. You'll never know when you actually need it.
And it's important to get it before you go, because you're not going to be able to get an IDP when you're on the road, because it needs to be coming from your home country.
Yep. And that you can literally get denied renting a car if you don't have it in a country that needs to see one. So it's important to have. I think the second thing is insurance. And actually, before I even talk about the insurance, I think the other thing is too, just it's a family value of ours to drive, to road trip while we're in other countries. So, and I am very comfortable driving. I enjoy driving in almost any place we go. Mm-hmm. But really, really examine your
comfort level.
Yeah, your comfort level being able to drive in other countries, because it can be intimidating.
Oh yeah, we have family friends who, they don't like driving in a new city, and so this probably wouldn't be an option for them. They would prefer to just use public transportation for long distances, use trains or buses, things like that. And that's totally fine too. This is just something that we like to do. I forgot to mention too, make sure that your driver's license is up to date, because you don't want it to expire while you're traveling. In fact, I think that happened to us.
Yes, it did.
We were going to go to England, or was it Spain?
It was Spain, I think, when yours expired.
Interesting. So yeah, we were going to go to Spain, and we were at the AAA office, and then the lady was like, well, we can't use this because your license expired. I was like, what? And I totally forgot to renew my license. So yeah, I guess he was the only one that was driving while we were traveling.
It's okay. So with insurance, I think the biggest, there's a few caveats. I think one thing to understand is if you have a driver's license and you have a car in the United States or wherever you're located, I'm just basing this off the United States because that's where we're at. your liability insurance that you have for your car will generally cover you, and we're not insurance experts, so please check with your local insurance, but they'll generally cover you for liability purposes in a lot of countries. So, for
Mhm.
example, the UK, our liability insurance covers us there. However, there are certain countries like Mexico, for example, where your liability insurance will not cover you at all. And Mexico requires an additional liability insurance. So when you're pricing out vehicles, say in Mexico, often you'll see the sticker price that doesn't include that mandatory liability cost. And you'll think, oh, great, $15 a day or $20 a day. This is cheap. But then you go to actually rent the car, and the mandatory insurance pushes it to over $50 a day. Just be aware there are certain countries where there are mandatory liability insurance that you can't bypass, and you need to have those part of that.
Yeah.
Additionally, insurance coverage like comprehensive care, that's like to cover any sort of damage to your vehicle. We generally lean on credit cards for that. So there are a number of credit cards that you can get. One of our favorite cards covers us for up to, I think, 60 days of a rental. So if you rent a car up to 60 days, it covers you for all comprehensive care.
Yeah.
So that's look into your credit cards for that as well.
I mean, the other thing in the topic of insurance is just having like medical insurance while you're traveling and travel insurance in general. Because, if you get into an accident, you might have insurance for the car, but then if you get injured, you're going to need to cover that through like a separate insurance, I think, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, one company that we like to use is Safety Wing. They have insurance that's made specifically for digital nomads. And we've used it in our past trips too. And it's affordable for families, which is something that we like.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind is road rules. Road rules. So we mentioned this in a previous episode, but just understanding the local rules around driving, understanding how speed limits work. Some areas like England and Italy, for example, don't explicitly always tell you what the speed limits are. And it's up to
Yeah.
you to know that when you're entering a town, the speed limits go to a certain amount, and you need to know that, especially if they're doing camera speed limit monitoring like they do in Italy. So you can end up with some pretty steep bills afterwards.
Yeah.
Uh,
If you're curious about like some of the places that we've driven in, I've written about our experience driving in Mexico and then also our experience driving in France. And then I also have an article on my website on renting a scooter in Bali. So you can also read about like what that experience is like and what to keep in mind if you're going to be renting scooters in Indonesia.
so when we travel, what is often the limit that you have when renting cars?
Yeah. So I don't know how to drive a manual transmission car. I only learned how to drive automatics. And so that sometimes is a limitation for me because other countries, well, usually the manual cars are cheaper to rent. And also sometimes that's the only option. And so, yeah, if you don't know how to drive a manual, find somebody, travel with somebody who does, or learn how to drive it so that you are able to rent cars in the other countries.
Yeah, to add insult to injury, it's also really hard to rent manual cars here in the US. In fact, almost impossible, if not impossible, to rent a manual car in the US. So there's not like you can rent a manual car here and
In
practice.
practice.
Our oldest son, who's 27 years old, he went to Spain for the first time a few years ago. He can only rent a manual car. He knew this up front. So his plan was to just go to a parking lot and practice, but he also had to get out of the rental car space where he had the car, in which case he had to drive with manual. So kudos to him. He learned on the spot and was able to drive a manual car during that time period. So it was rough learning, but just understand that manual cars
Yeah.
exist and are pretty common outside.
So what about like navigating through places or navigating in different places? What are some suggestions that you have for that? Or
Sure.
maybe some stories that we
Yeah,
have.
sure. My recommendation is just take Astrid everywhere because that's actually the best navigation tool I can recommend. No, I think this comes into play like, well, we like watching The Amazing Race. This is always one person's driving, one person's navigating. That's how we do it. Since I drive the majority of the time, especially when we travel, Astrid is often navigating. She's really good at it. And so that's helpful. Sometimes, though, it can be a little tricky. So, for example, we were in Lyon, France. Astrid speaks French. I do not. And so as we're driving around, Astrid would say, turn, I don't know what's an example.
Like the city center is called Vieux Lyon, which means like old Lyon. And so I'd be like, oh yeah, I would see this on the map, the map application. And I'm like, yeah, just take the next exit at Vieux Lyon. Well, if you're not familiar with how French is spelled, Vieux is spelled Vieux, which that's what Clint is seeing. And he doesn't realize that that's what I'm saying. And so we pass the exit. I'm like, you just missed the exit. And Lyon is notorious for like, you miss an exit. There's like all these one ways. So you miss an exit and it takes you like 20 minutes just to turn back around to go the right direction. So that gets frustrating after a while. And so definitely learn, the language a little bit more, or at least like figure out a way to communicate like the turns. I think eventually I was like, take this next exit instead of like, take the Via Leone exit.
Yeah. One other one is like when we were in the UK, entering these giant roundabouts.
The roundabouts, yeah.
And some of these roundabouts are huge. And if you're not familiar with roundabouts, you basically enter the circular part of the highway and you go around and there's multiple exits off of the highway. And so we're off of the road. And so in the UK, especially since we're used to driving in the US, it's the opposite direction as any of the roundabouts in the US.
And the exit signs. So in the US, we're used to seeing signs here, like above us, but the UK and other countries are like this too. They'll put like the lane that you're supposed to be in on the road. They'll write it out on the road.
Yeah.
And there won't be any signs up ahead. So then it makes it challenging to know like where you're supposed to go or not.
Yeah. So one trick that we learned was Astrid just got to the point where she's like, take the fourth left. And that was really helpful. And then she would help me count out the lefts as we were going.
Yeah.
So things like that. I mean, that just comes with like experience and stuff. But like giving enough bandwidth to know when to turn. The other thing I think you do really well is you actually look at the map and figure out and don't rely on the turn-by-turn directions. Because sometimes the turn-by-turn directions are slow or laggy.
Yep.
And you can get in the wrong spot.
Yeah. That's what makes having a navigator and a driver like helpful. So what about driving on the opposite side of the road that you're used to? What tips do you have for that?
Yeah, that can be tricky. A funny story is we went to Scotland. We were in Scotland for a month and a half, and I had booked a small car. This is something I guess to know also. It doesn't matter what you reserve on the rental car site. Whatever they have in stock is what they're going to give you. So we had reserved a tiny car, just as, small for our family of four.
Yeah, no, like if you can, like research like the road conditions in countries that you're going to visit. Like if the country tends to have like very narrow roads, you don't want to rent a big car.
Yeah.
Or, in the US, if it's like the roads tend to be bigger, it's okay to rent an SUV or a minivan. But
yeah. So needless to say, all they had was, and if you've ever been to Scotland, their roads tend to be really small in some cases, and even their highways are actually not that big.
Yeah.
And so the only vehicle they had was a big Ford Ranger pickup truck. And if you're not familiar with a Ford Ranger pickup truck, it's like any American pickup truck. They're big, wide, tall vehicles. And so that's all we had to drive in Scotland. And so driving on the left side of the road, UK is completely flipped from the US. So not only is it the opposite side of the road, it's the opposite side of the car too. So you're both trying to navigate being on the left side of the road and also having to change your depth perception where you are in the vehicle. Additionally, luckily the truck was automatic, so that was not big of an issue. But the first time we went to the UK, we rented a manual car. And so it's also learning adjusting to shift gears with your left hand instead of your right hand while driving. So I think one of the tips is go somewhere where you can practice a little bit, be forgiving. Your depth perception is going to be off. So try to hug the center lane as much as you can, because we both made this mistake where we kept leaning towards the side of the road, and I hit the curb several times
Yeah.
because I was leaning too far to the side of the road.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it. I mentioned the stories I had on the website about driving in Mexico and driving in France and renting a scooter. And
I
yeah,
think
it's really just like give yourself some space and patience, have a lot of patience as you're driving.
I think one thing I want to mention about renting and scooters briefly is renting scooters in Indonesia or anywhere
Yes.
really is, in order for your insurance to cover you in case you get in any sort of accident
Yes.
or anything like that, you actually have to have a motorcycle endorsement.
Mhm.
This is a super common mistake that many people don't realize, but basically if you rent a scooter in, say, Indonesia, and you get in an accident and you need to file an insurance claim on your personal insurance from the United States, if you don't have a motorcycle endorsement on your driver's license, they actually have the right and the legal right to deny your claim.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have a motorcycle endorsement if you can. It's also just great. You'll understand driving a two-wheel vehicle a lot better,
Yeah.
and it can really help you out when navigating. The thing is, when you're driving in Indonesia, especially a scooter, not only if you're not used to a scooter and being on two wheels, you're dealing with that anxiety. Plus, chances are you have one of your kids on the back. So you're dealing with that anxiety. And the third thing is it's busy. Like Indonesia is a busy place to drive in, and you have to understand the ebb and flow. So if you're trying to also deal with not being comfortable with the scooter, it can be too overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. So having before you leave, taking a weekend to take one of those motorcycle endorsement classes would be really helpful. And again, just gives you a little bit more comfort, gives you a little bit more tips of how to drive a two-wheeled vehicle. And actually it makes me a better driver of a four-wheel vehicle. So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah. All right. Anything else you'd like to add today?
No, I think that's it.
Well, that's all for today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Worldschooling Q&A with Astrid and Clint. Be sure to check out the show notes for any links we mentioned in the episode, and visit my website, thewanderingdaughter.com, to dive deeper into worldschooling and family travel.
If you like what you hear, please consider supporting The Wandering Daughter on Patreon. It really helps us out and keeps the show going. You'll also get exclusive perks like episode transcripts, additional resources, access to office hours with us, and more. You can find us on Spotify or the podcast app of your choice. If you're listening to this on Spotify, you can tap the bell icon to get notified when new episodes come out. And if you like this episode, please give us a 5-star review. It really helps new people find our show.
If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap the bell icon to get notified of new episodes. You can follow me on Instagram @WanderDaughter or follow The Wandering Daughter on Facebook. Links to these are also in the show notes. If you have any world schooling questions you'd like us to answer for future episodes, feel free to throw them in the comments or send us a message at thewanderingdaughter.com/podcast. Until next time, happy travels!
Bye!